Hello, everyone, and good morning. We have had a record number of sign-ups for this webinar this morning. So we're going to give a couple of minutes for everyone to get settled, get their cup of tea, and get ready for hopefully what will be a very enlightening discussion today for the launch of the 2023 HomeViews Sustainability Report. As I'm sure you're all aware, I'm being joined by two heavyweights of the build-to-rent industry, or icons, as I just said earlier, which got greeted with a lot of chuckles from both of them, but who'll be introducing themselves shortly. Just while we wait for a few more people, Richard, I'm loving the sort of modus operandi of Moda behind you. Tell us a little bit about that.
So this was created about 3 years ago. I joined the company just over 3 years ago now, and we wanted to frame what we're all about. What's Moda actually about? So we use this with our team. So every site has this team welfare areas, and this is what we live by day in, day out. So it's a combination of what we believe in, how we want to frame ourselves, and almost the culture within Moda. So the Moda operandi is what we live by day in, day out.
I love that. We don't do BS. That is
yeah, that's a bit
one.
controversial, but yeah. But the investors love that as well. So, you know, it communicates quite clearly. Yeah.
Straight talking.
Absolutely.
Well, greetings everyone. As I said, we've had a record number of sign-ups this morning. Welcome to the launch of the HomeViews 2023 Sustainability Report. My name's Rory Cramer. I'm CEO and co-founder of HomeViews. I'm joined today by two people that have an amazing standing within the build-to-rent sector and two very unique perspectives on sustainability within our industry and how to implement it and what it actually means. So without further ado, I'd love my panelists to introduce themselves. Brendan.
Hi, Brendan Geraghty. I'm the Chief Exec of the UKAA. We're the body that represents the build-to-rent sector here in the UK. My background is that I'm an architect, and I've really been engaged with the whole sustainability question for probably 25 years now. So, yeah, that's my background.
Thank you, Brendan. And Richard?
Hi, I'm Richard. I work for Moda. I head up the operational team of Moda. Got a great team backing me. I joined just over 3 years ago, as I said earlier. I've come from a hospitality background, so branching over to the BTR sector has been really, really insightful for me, and it's reinvigorated everything that I've grown and known over the last 20, 30 years, bring it into the play of BTR. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Richard. We've just had an immediate comment from Ian Murray at Cortland. Ian, thank you, saying that we have the settings for the webinar to focus on the speaker only. Grace, if you're there, if you could try and remedy that, that would be great. But guys, we will crack on. So the format today, I'm going to give a bit of a summary of some of the 2023 Sustainability Report findings from HomeViews, the resident perspective on sustainability, and then we're going to get into a discussion point and unpack some of the key issues around sustainability with these experts we have here. So without further ado, for all of you that have signed up to the webinar, you will be receiving a recording, and you'll also be able to download a copy of the sustainability report, which will go live straight after this. So I don't want to ruin any surprises, and there are a few spoilers in here, but hopefully I can give you some context. So this report we've been doing now for 3 years, and it's based around one of the questions we ask residents at HomeViews, which is, are environmentally sustainable features important to you? And if you select yes, you then select the features of your home that are most important to you. I think one big point just to share is obviously with the ESG agenda growing in importance, HomeViews really sets itself as the S in ESG by just engaging with residents and providing a level of transparency and using that feedback to further and improve your buildings, whether it be in the operations or the design. You know, that transparency is a huge part of the social thread of ESG, and I think that We are seeing HomeViews being used in investor reporting, in ESG and sustainability credentials like GRESB, Next Generation. And so I think the resident really plays a huge part in engaging with the resident in any ESG strategy moving forward. So one of the key stats is, are environmentally sustainable features important to you as a resident? And what we've seen in this year's results, which is based on well over 6,000 resident reviews, we have this sustainability data on over nearly 16,000 resident reviews, is that there has been a small increase year on year. 70% of residents say environmentally sustainable features are important to them. And when you break that down by sector, the sector that says it's most important to residents is build to rent. And what's really interesting about that is build to rent typically, as those of you that work in the industry will know, the majority of residents tend to be in that age bracket of 18 up to 34. And some of the stats that we've seen, and these are typically backed up by a lot of other surveys within the sector, actually show that younger people care less about sustainability. What's more important to them is affordability, which we can understand. However, that trend is slightly bucked in build to rent. So build to rent residents care most out of all residents in residential in the UK about environmental sustainable features. And I think the takeout of that is there is a huge opportunity to increase the visibility of your sustainable credentials and your approach to sustainability as an operator and as a brand when you're marketing yourself to prospective build-to-rent residents. Here we look at a breakdown of that difference in age. So as you can see, as I said, overall across all sectors, the younger age groups actually say they care less than the older age groups. Now, you'll notice on the top here, the biggest change, the biggest positive change to that answer was actually in the younger generation, which is fantastic to see. So 3.4% of 18 to 24-year-old respondents, there was an increase of 3.4% year on year, a 2.3% in 25 to 34, which is fantastic. So that younger generation are beginning to care more. They are beginning to get a better understanding. I think probably a big part of that is the cost of living crisis, where people really understand that actually an energy efficient building can have a direct impact on their wallet, which is obviously very important in the current climate. And when we look at what features are most important, again, and this is consistent with our previous reports, recycling is number one, with energy saving measures and renewable energy sources closely following that. We're going to do a little bit of unpacking as to why we think recycling is number one. I mean, I suppose it's slightly obvious. It's something you touch and feel every day. There's been a huge amount of education around that. But what we have seen is the features that have increased in importance most are usually around the energy saving measures and cost of energy to the consumer. So clearly this cost of living crisis and energy costs has had an impact on what people value and say is important to them moving forward, which you would expect as well. So as I said, the top three most valued features: recycling, energy saving measures, and renewable energy. With recycling, it was often the ease or lack of that sometimes raised awareness of this. You know, being able to segment, and I know that Rishi Sunak has a view on this, as we all probably saw recently, being able to properly segment your recycling, being able the ease of that process. A lot of the buildings that do have a really efficient refuse strategy, and I know that shoots can divide opinion sometimes, because when they don't work, they really don't work, but that ease is really valued. On obviously energy saving measures and being able to really understand as a resident what your energy consumption is, and then hopefully being able to improve that and impact that because you've got the technology or the awareness is really valued. Also, the the feedback that we get in new homes in general, which is a pro and a con sometimes, is overheating issues in the summer. But the other side of that is in the winter, very warm buildings and relatively low energy bills in comparison to standard residential stock or period residential stock. And then renewable energy, I think people are aware where their buildings factor in or are providing renewable energy. And Richard, I know that Moda do. It obviously comes at a higher cost. And while we can't bottom out, whether people, really apply a premium to that, it is very much more on people's radar of where their energy is coming from as well. So this is a bit more of a detailed breakdown, looking at all those different preferences based on age group. And as you can see, for the 18 to 24 age bracket, or the younger age bracket, they really increased their preferences towards sustainable building features that had a direct impact on their wallets. And then I suppose, what can we do with this data? And I do think it's really important that there are obviously factors of how a resident engages with the sustainable features of a building that really need to be implemented at the very beginning of the design process. A refuse strategy or renewable energy features. There's a lot of tech out there that can be integrated throughout the life cycle of a building, but some of this really needs to be thought about right at the earliest stages of design and delivery. And just a bit of a shout out for HomeViews Pro, which is our new data product. So all of the analysis that you've seen here today has been done using HomeViews Pro, which allows you to look at all of the information and the data that we collect right across the sector, particularly obviously with high coverage in build to rent, and then using that to have an impact on your planning, your design, and how you actually deliver these buildings to be as sustainable as possible, and to tick the boxes for the residents' preferences is I think key and pretty unique. This is the first time this data and this level of information has been available from the consumer perspective. I think the industry's always had a very good perspective on what they think that should be done and how they need to reach certain ESG and sustainable criteria, but we also need to understand what the residents value. There are some fantastic case studies of how our partners are using this data within their specific processes, whether it be from a planning perspective. There's a great case study of Hadley Property Group, but also from a KPI and operations perspective. And I shout out to Richard there from Moda. So just to sum up the key findings from this report, there has been an increase in the percentage of residents who say environmentally sustainable features are important to them. Build to rent residents value sustainable features most, even though the proportion of those residents are in that younger age group category, which typically have a lower preference for environmental sustainable features. The youngest age group have seen the highest increase in saying that sustainable features are important to them, and that is particularly focused around energy saving measures and renewable energy. Recycling remains the most important feature, and also as we discussed, and it's not a surprise, anything that has impacted or can alleviate that cost of living crisis has massively increased in what people are saying is important to them. So guys, that's a whistle-stop tour of some of the findings from our 2023 sustainability report, which you'll be able to download straight after this webinar. But enough of me and our data. I'd love to get the panelists involved now. So the first question I have, and everyone, please do throw any questions at us on the Q&A. We'll leave some time at the end to answer those. But firstly, Richard, Moda is very highly regarded from a sustainability perspective. You've won a number of accolades as a brand and a business on your approach to this. Can you give us a bit of a flavour about, how Moda are engaging with your residents when it comes to sustainability, and what your strategy is around this?
Absolutely. Thank you, Rory. Some great insight as well in that report. And some of that insight actually matches what we've done as a business, because we've reached out to our residents and the local communities where we operate and asked very similar questions, because we're very aware that there's so much noise, there's so much you can do, fitting solar panels, electrical car charging points, there's so much you can do. But unless you ask the people who live or work around your community, you truly do not know what's important to them. So we actually asked a key critical question. Do you want to live a sustainable lifestyle? 92% of the people, of all the people we asked, said yes, we absolutely do want to. But then when we broke down the demographics, and you picked up on that as well, the younger generation, which is very surprising for us, was less interested than the older generation. So what we've been trying to work out is, how do we distill the communication we want to get across? How do we nudge behavior, which is absolutely paramount to us? We frame everything in the Next Generation Futures program. We have next generation spaces, next generation communities. So we use aspects of what we want to do to try and understand what the people who live with us and the people we impact around us actually want to know about sustainable lifestyle, and what can we do collectively together to impact that behavioral change. Ultimately, this is a people business. Anyone can go and spend money and put a solar panel on a roof. That's not what this is about. From the Moda perspective, it's about that engagement and how we can culturally change the behavior, because we believe that will have a far greater impact than spending capital on buying things here and there at different sites. So it's how you engage with your people is what we've focused on. We've asked our people, which I think is really important, because again, there is so much out there, you need to start somewhere. So ask the people who actually live and work and have an impact. And that's where we started from. And then from that intelligence, that data, we've then overlaid what we can do in the here and now and what longer term plans we should have in play.
Okay, that's interesting. That I suppose the changing the culture and the behavior of residents really can have an impact on the sustainable performance of a building. I think I was speaking to Catherine Rose from Verve the other day, and she came up with a fantastic quote, which is, you can have the most sustainable building and energy efficient building in the world, but if your residents have their heating on all day with the windows open and they leave the lights on, it is going to be wasted. So I think it's building that understanding how your residents want to live, and what they value, but also, I suppose, giving them the tools and the awareness and the advice to live as sustainably as possible. Is that something that you proactively do at Moda? I remember anecdotally, I think it was the McEwan, there is some information available to residents where they can see where they sit in the sort of energy consumption within the building.
I mean, we construct and we design the latest technology in place, so energy efficient lighting, etc. We're very lucky because our buildings, the oldest is 4 years old now, so we're very lucky. They're all built to the latest spec. But yes, technology is a method to get the end result, but you always need that people culture to make that come alive. So in all of our apartments, we use, one of our partners is Utopia. So every apartment has a sensor, and it senses, the light, the energy in use, the CO2 emissions, the air quality. And then we gamify that to bring a more understandable approach for the residents to understand, because ESG could be quite boring, let's be honest. It's not the most imaginative subject, even the choice of words, ESG. So we try to gamify everything to make it a little bit more fun, a little bit more understandable for a normal person. And I think I'm quite normal, but I don't understand half of this, how I could impact my actual energy performance versus someone in the same one-bed apartment down the corridor whose performance may be better than mine. And it's how you gamify that through technology, but ultimately it still comes back to that people element, because you still need someone to do something as a result of the data share. And I think that's the bit that I want to really get sort of outlaid today. Is great to have all this stuff and you need that, but you've still got to engage with your people. You've still got to make it understandable for a normal person how they can do what you want them to do, ultimately for the benefit of everyone. You picked up on a point earlier about the younger generation within BTR sites perhaps being less focused on sustainability. And I think that was really interesting because we almost had the same feedback with our demographic, which took us by surprise. We thought that the younger generation would be more engaged, but no, they were less engaged, it appeared. But I think maybe we asked the wrong question, because I think in today's younger demographic, it's an expectation. Whereas the older generation, my generation, is, wow, solar panel lighting, great, fantastic. So I think the younger generation expect it. They want it instantly. They want the recycling to start in their apartment with segregated bins. Whereas to me, that's quite a new thing. But the younger generation, it's their culture. And also we have a wide demographic of cultures from around the world. It's understanding how you tap into that demographic of different cultures. What's important to those different cultures? Because it may be different to what I think is important. And it's tapping into that understanding through data, through technology, but it churns out the action at the end for the people to be actually doing something with the data.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think this leads me on, Brendan, to something I'd love your view on. I think that, within the industry, we're incredibly focused on the sustainable ratings, reaching net zero, the ESG agenda, but there's a lot of jargon in that. There's a lot of industry jargon. And I think what you're saying, Richard, is, how do we put that into a language that the residents can really relate to and understand? But Brendan, you're in a unique position at the UKAA to really understand how the industry is approaching sustainability and ESG. And also, is build to rent leading the way? What's your view on this?
I mean, there's a few questions in that question. I think the first point is that build to rent is leading the way on many levels. But I think we need to just go back a moment, just to some of the earlier stats you produced and where we are on our sustainability journey. I think it's fair to say that to date, it's largely been a technical dynamic. How do we get the right technology? How do we design the right buildings and all of that sort of thing? But if you look at your sustainability ratings, the one that had the least kind of interest, maybe not least interest, the least response, was the materiality, because it can be quite complex. And we have an army of architects and engineers and others who are invested in trying to find those solutions, and indeed are doing a fantastic job in producing and developing product that is that now very, very close to net zero in use, and taking on the embodied carbon issue. But if we move now to the residents, I think, and the customers, it is, to Richard's point, a people business. Build to rent has always been a people business. The source of revenue in build to rent are the customers. And I think that the residential real estate industry as a whole is coming around to the importance of customers in a massive new shift. And the role of sustainability within that now is extremely important. And this is now something quite evident. I'm part of a group called the Green Property Alliance, which is the bringing together of all the industry bodies to look at the green agenda, to look at the sustainability agenda. There's some big brains in that group and some very powerful organizations, and none of them have considered the role of the customer. Yeah. So I've introduced that to that dynamic, and we'll see where that takes us, because to echo what Catherine Rose said, you can have the best product in the world, but if the people are using it badly, then you've got a problem. So this culture of sustainability, I think, is really, really important. Is build to rent leading the way? I think partly. I think the work that groups like Moda and others are doing to educate, to gamify, it sounds like a flippant thing, but it's a really important thing, because communication is important. The way that we get people to understand the impact of their behavior is really important. And you can't use a technical argument when you're talking about effectively consumer culture. And let's not forget that it was only last year that sustainability really entered consumer culture in a material way, when the second most important decision when deciding where to move in a property was the cost of the energy. To date, that has not been a factor. That's a watershed for us as a society, and we'll progress on from there. So I think the role of the customer in build to rent is massively important. Because we understand that role, we can use that dynamic to create the culture of understanding around sustainability. So to your question, yes, we are leading the way.
Well, I suppose that's where build to rent is very unique, right? And one of the big reasons the HomeViews data overall, it shows that build to rent tenants are the happiest residents in new homes in the UK, is having, you know, an operational team, a management team who can have a direct impact on the way you live, can have that cultural impact over time. And I suppose, just to summarize what you're saying, Brendan, is, you know, that we're very focused on the product at the moment around sustainability, but we need to not move away from that. We need to put equal amount of investment in the way that product is used, and by implementing and creating a culture from residents that provides them an opportunity to live in the most sustainable way possible. An anecdote to that is we work very closely with Long Harbour and Way of Life, who are a partner of HomeViews, and they were able to use their sustainability data to see that actually, as I've just shown, is reflected that recycling is very important to residents. One of the takeouts for them is, well, what can we do to provide the easiest way to recycle super efficiently? That isn't that easy in a lot of buildings and a lot of boroughs and councils with the way that they collect refuse. And the same goes for the way you use your energy, the way that you and giving you the data and the information through whether it's just comms or bits of tech, to be able to understand, you know, how your energy use is in comparison to the rest of your residents. There's nothing like a guilt trip to get your energy use down, but also examples of how you can do this, and that education process, which I suppose the build to rent sector is in a unique position to do, because you're managing these assets in perpetuity, proactively, and making sure that that is the case will have a material impact on the energy performance of the building, and something we're going to come into next, potentially the valuation and the investment value of a building as well.
Yeah, can I just chip in there? I think you're absolutely right. I think obviously the investment from the stakeholders, the investors, is important, and they're waking up to perhaps more of an ESG view. But I think, going back to what Brendan was saying, you know, we asked our residents, is it important you live in a community? Because BTR is about forming communities. 91% of our residents said absolutely. This is why we're choosing to live in BTR rather than an apartment down the road in some house with 3 or 4 other flats. So I think the benefit of BTR actually will make the tidal wave of ESG come to the forefront for everyone. It has such a massive impact, because if we're leading the way as such, then others will follow. You've always got to have that vanguard, that first step into that. And I think BTR, forget Moda, BTR is that route. And I think what UKAA are doing is amazing. It certainly supports and it pushes the boundaries. And certainly Brendan pushes me all the time, or, you know, asking questions about what we're doing within Moda. And it makes you realize the impact of BTR is absolutely incredible to the wider industry. So I think that everything that we're doing has the ultimate aim of making, you know, everything better for everyone ultimately.
Yeah, and putting the customer first.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, just to add to that, there's 2 bits to this, though, aren't there? There's the creating the consumer culture awareness around sustainability, which is a slow but important process, and it's underway, not just from build to rent, but I think generally in our society, and build to rent are doing their bits, and certainly Moda on as well. But the other side of the coin is the money, where the investors are. And my personal view is, looking at our industry, is that, you know, the capital markets are going to deliver the sustainability way in advance of any government regulation, because of the role of ESG. And I'd be interested, Richard, I mean, are you seeing money influence the outputs that they want to see increasingly? Are they touching the operational model, the behavioral models, more than they have in the past?
Yeah, very much. And I certainly, in the last 3 years, since I became part of the BTR industry, I've seen a dramatic increase of involvement from those initial investors and stakeholders. We have several stakeholders, and they now require us to report on ESG every single month through different portals that they require, which we never had before. And I think also the capital outlay, if I floated a capital project in them which had a high ESG credential, they'd be very much up for that. So I think, yes, the capital market, the investor market has certainly driven lots of this change. It's, getting that market from them is really, really important, really important.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just to back that up, guys, I did a bit of digging. There's a couple of reports out recently, one from Knight Frank. 77% of surveyed investors have minimum environmental certification criteria. Some of that criteria, 47% require BREEAM excellent or outstanding ratings. CBRE actually had an even higher proportion when they interviewed investors. 88% said that they would continue to use ESG criteria to assess investment decisions in 2023. I suppose the big question, and I was kind of saving this until last, but we're on it now, so we'll jump into it, is how will the ESG credentials and sustainable credentials of a building impact its valuation and the appetite for investors moving forward? I've asked a few valuers offline, and I think it's fair to say they believe it will do, but they aren't able to quantify that yet. There hasn't been enough deals in the market to be able to say, that building with an A rating and doing everything, ticking all the boxes, is valued at X versus maybe a build-to-rent building V1 that maybe doesn't have that level of design and engineering within it. But guys, just on to get back on my train of thought. So recycling is the most important thing, but from our, we all know that that's only a tiny part of the jigsaw. And a stat, Brendan, I'll let you share it, around the emissions of buildings in relation to the wider carbon footprint. But before you talk about that, what can be done to educate the residents more from the point of deciding where they live, to really show the sustainable credentials of a building? Obviously, there's the environmental ratings, but I think a lot of them need to be unpacked. What do they actually mean? Do you think there is value in marketing that a building it has used sustainable methods of construction? Because you don't see that a lot in the marketing of these buildings on actually attracting residents. And a base level thing to do would be to say, living in this building will mean that your energy bills are lower than if you were to live in, a standard type of residential stock. But what do you think that could be done, and what should we be doing more of to really highlight the sustainable credentials of these buildings from a consumer perspective? Brendan, to you.
I mean, I think it's hugely important, and it's also quite tricky because it can be a complicated narrative, if you like. So what do we choose? I think, recycling is a practical solution. We can do it every day. We can establish a ritual. Rituals create the culture that's necessary. But the wider issues, I think, we still need to do a lot of thinking about. Now, if you look at where sustainability is going in consumer culture, everybody is now kind of on the page where flying is a little bit of a problem, or maybe not a little bit of a problem, maybe it's a big problem. And we know that flights need to be taken judiciously, that there is pollution associated, or in carbon production, carbon issues associated with flying. But if we look at the stats, the aviation industry, or flying, produces, and I've tried to find the worst stats I can find, about 5.7% of global emissions. The built environment produces 40%.
Yeah.
So I'm not suggesting that it's okay to fly. That's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is that our cultural understanding of how damaging buildings are has a long way to go. We need to be careful about our flying, but we need to be extremely careful about our buildings. And this asks two questions. We're lucky in build to rent. Most of our buildings are new. So we can bring this technology and this thinking in from the get-go, and we can market it. We need to look at the retrofit issue as well. But I think, to the point on how we advance the consumer question, I think we should talk about how safe our buildings are. Yeah. Fundamentally, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Is it a safe place to be? Is its performance, will it make me feel good? Will it help me to develop myself in my world? If it can do those things, and it can do it by saving money and give us access to the things that are important to well-being, we definitely need to start marketing these as real value propositions. The emotional side of how we live is a very underrated value benchmark in residential real estate.
I think I kind of got a slightly cynical comment after one of the panels I did recently, where I was talking about the importance of events in build to rent, and the fact that build to rent, really leads. Some of the buildings that we visited have events on most days, whether it be events for pet owners, events for families, the running club, the pizza club on a Friday. And they were like, we're a residential I won't name the person that mentioned this to me, but we're a residential operator. We're not an events business. But I think that the point about an event or running events is a curation of a community. And I've lived in a number of new homes developments over the years, built to sell, where I didn't know my neighbors. There wasn't a sense of community because the community wasn't being curated. But I think the real power of that is when you then start to get the community understanding, how they could collectively live more sustainably, how, and educate the residents on, what they can do to make their lifestyles more sustainable. It can have a big impact because it's the whole building, it's the whole community working in one direction. So just a bit of a shot back to that person who commented on events, but from Moda's perspective, Richard, is there anything specifically within your marketing around the sustainable credentials of your building, these sustainability sort of accolades that Moda has, and your approach? Is that increasing in your sort of brand positioning, or has it always been part of it? How do you?
It's always been part of it, but it has increased as we've got more and more accolades. So you want to shout about what you've been awarded, but what's behind that is explain to the residents, even from the welcome pack. So every one of our residents get a welcome pack. We plant a tree, and that's part of the welcome pack. So every new resident has a tree planted for them. In fact, even with the energy that we're using, we've planted 80,000 trees, I think, last year. So I guess it's bringing it back to an understandable way of communicating to people from different cultures about what we're doing. Health and well-being from Moda is at the core of what we do. So every resident, for instance, is offered a health assessment when they come to live in one of our communities. They can take it, they don't have to take it if they don't want to, and it gives them a personalized program about their health at that point in time, and what they can do within the gym that we provide, and what they can do to improve their health and well-being. Even our employees, we give every one of our employees a Fitbit, and we gamify that through team challenges. Currently, we're all walking to the moon. So the steps that we're generating, and again, that's bringing, I guess, ESG to a more tangible, understandable route to people by ticking on items that you can, I guess, be measured against if you want to be measured against them. But not everything we do within Moda is for measurable circumstances. If we win an accolade, fantastic. We shout from the rooftops about it. But that's just a benchmark. It's more about what we do fundamentally. So walking to the moon for our colleagues is really important. And who's going to walk the most steps is really important for them. And it has an ultimate aim of the culture, that nudge of culture, going back to what I originally said. So I think, the culture within Moda it's fresh, it's vibrant. We're a nimble company. We can move things. We ask our people what they want to do. And I think that gives the power to the residents, to the customers. Now, we don't want to manage or curate loads and loads of events. We want them to do that themselves. That has far more input, far more power than us putting on a bingo evening, for instance. We've done all that. We started by that, doing all these beautiful events. But we asked the people, are we doing what you want? And they came back and said, well, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. So we've given the power back to the residents through focus groups to organize themselves, ultimately, within their own neighborhood and community. And I think, one of the interesting things we found was the most impactful thing that they wanted was locally sourced mini markets, pop-ups within their developments. 56% of our residents want those. We weren't doing that. And that has such a big impact. We can curate that, we can engage and create those through contacts, but the residents now run those. Communal growing gardens was the other one. Quite a simple thing. And Quintain Living do a great job on that down at Wembley. They even have a greenhouse on one of their roofs. So there are many operators that are picking up on things naturally, I think, by the power of asking the customers what they want.
I will echo that. I think it's really important for build-to-rent operators to play their role and a leadership position in encouraging, enabling, facilitating. But it's our individual responsibility to choose to act, and, I think, one of the biggest sources of carbon is the contents of our fridge. How far away did the food have to get flown in? So these things like gardens and localized produce, and that, whilst not necessarily providing scale, scale will come in time. What they are providing is culture, and evolving culture, and stimulating that culture to become embedded. And once culture becomes embedded, we can look at scale. If we go back to the technical arguments, we are now at a position where we should be asking ourselves, what is the scalable technology that can deliver really profound change? That's taken 25 years. It's certainly in my time as an architect. So it's the same on the cultural side. So we need to recognize our roles, what our role is, but we also need to recognize what the role of our customer is, and working with them is going to provide the results that we need.
And also having engaged investors. I think their role obviously is fundamental. That's where the money comes from to kick off everything, and getting them on that journey and explaining to them what we want to do, what the results are through technology, through reporting. They get it. These institutional investors get it completely. Which is great.
Cool. And as the stats from the Knight Frank and CBRE reports, and speaking to a number of investors, it is a key criteria to where they will place their money and who they will invest with, and the buildings that they'll invest in. There's been some fantastic comments coming through, so I just want to touch on them. We have had a comment, a couple of comments aligned to the same things. I wonder if, although very important to younger people, the fear is if this will be reflected in rents. This was then echoed by John Kenny. Can the younger generation afford to care? Is what we experience with them apathy or a recognition that they cannot afford to care about it? And I think just to talk about those, I think, obviously as we've shown, smart features and renewable energy sources, all of that, and just that the quality and the build quality of these buildings are being modern. Obviously, that means that the energy use of these buildings is typically a lot lower than you would see in a secondary or period property. That has a direct impact on affordability, and I do genuinely think that's something that is missed a lot in the marketing of these buildings. I appreciate, Richard, your point that actually you do offer renewable energy in all of your buildings, and that does come at a slight premium. But I would say that premium would, relative to living in a period building that isn't as energy efficient, would probably be offset. So I think affordability is a huge point. But from our perspective at HomeViews, when we're reading, we're now 40,000 reviews across the new home sector. We have reviews on over 95% of all operational build-to-rent stock. And, me and my team, believe it or not, read every single one of those reviews. And what's coming out anecdotally, and you're seeing it in other sectors and other commercial decisions we make, is although we can't really see a premium yet for a truly, sustainable building, what I think if you have one building on one side of a road that is really putting sustainability and the culture of sustainability and the ability to live your life sustainably through all the things we've talked about today, versus a building opposite that doesn't do any of that, there is definitely, with the age group of people that live and build to rent, there is going to be a move towards, well, I want to do my bit and I will choose that building. So while you might not be able to quantify a premium in rent today in terms of levels of occupancy, as we move into a more competitive build to rent environment with more being built, and churn rates, how long people stay there, that sense of community, I do think you'll be able to start quantifying this over the next couple of years. Well, what do you guys think about that? Do you believe that's going to that's coming into the way people make a decision on where they live?
I think so, definitely. And we want sticky residents. We want residents to stay with us at all rent levels. So it's not the premium necessarily, it's always the entry level as well. And how we get those people to stay with Moda, the brand, and taking them through their journey of rental, from leaving university, even being at university and student accommodation, to their first entry to the BTR market. To get a sticky resident, people will want to see the difference between two sites, one opposite each other. And ESG, or the elements around that, will be one of those very, very important factors, we believe, certainly within Moda, health and well-being. And because it's not necessarily about ESG, it's health and well-being, it's social engagement, it's all those things which are much more understandable than environmental, social, and governance. It's all about health and well-being for Moda, how we engage with those people, and how we create that community, that culture of understanding and data sharing, gamifying it, all the things we've spoken about will make the residents become sticky in the future.
Yeah. Thank you.
I want to add to that. I think that you're absolutely right. I think brand is the new dimension within consumer-focused business. And it's not new. It's been out there in the retail world for 1,000 years. It's new in residential real estate. And brand fundamentally is an emotional language that wraps around the product. And I think that the value alignment that you get with brand is what will be the thing that makes decisions on for customers. At the moment, with the demand for houses and place somewhere to live being so high, we're in a situation where people will take whatever they can find. As we mature, I think the market will become more discerning, and they will look for value alignment, not monetary value alignment. I mean ethical value alignment in these decision makings, and those are the emotional side of the thing. So, brand before building is always my recommendation to anybody getting into build to rent.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the brand. Sorry, Rory. I think brand is very important as we scale up. We have that spread of communities around the UK or wherever. The brand understanding of what Moda or whatever brand stands for will become a deciding factor for people to choose where they want to live.
Absolutely. Guys, I just want to pick up on some more of these questions. We've had more of a statement. Sebastian Moritz. Hi, Sebastian. Do you agree that speaking about ESG should start at the beginning of the customer life cycle with the build-to-rent operator as part of your brand marketing, which we've just discussed? Over 90% of our mystery shopping audits reveal the focus is still on security or safety, but never sustainability. So, Sebastian, I think that we've definitely talked around this, and Brendan, you even mentioned the important that Maslow hierarchy of needs and the importance of security and safety. But I think there is a lack of clarity and consumer language around sustainability and the sustainable credentials of a building and what that really means for you as a resident. So, Sebastian, I agree. James Partridge, hi James, some fantastic feedback here, talking about how important resident behaviour is. Also, he has a view on the valuation of buildings in terms of future valuation of buildings. Build to rent should have a natural advantage due to the inherent long-term incentives. Do you think this message is better conveyed by the phrase green premium, or if this becomes the normal expectation, is a brown discount a more powerful influence? I suppose that goes to John Kenny's point. What's your view, Brendan? A green premium, or is there a brown discount? What's the balance? I
think that, I mean, to be honest, I think that's still too much the language of money. I think if we look at the demographic which is coming forward, which will be occupied. I mean, I know there's a spread of demographics in build to rent, but if we look at who we're really catering for and who we will be employing, we're looking at the younger generations who we're looking for someplace to live, and we need to provide for that. And their expectation is that stuff isn't built. They're not making it a special case. It should just be germane, and I think I think the fact that I think the green premium versus brown discount is the language of money. It's not the language of culture. I think that's really important. And I think, and when we flip it into the cultural conversation, it's just going to be a fantastically performing building that does everything that you want because it's got those features built in. Now, obviously, we've got to transition to that. and the language of that is really important. And we will see things influencing that. B Corp will come through. Who are B Corps? Because we know what B Corp stands for. So B Corp is a much more consumer-friendly understanding of sustainability and environmental stuff than BREEAM.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, so those are the things that I think will emerge and evolve and help us to make the argument in a consumer culture sense.
Yeah, I do think there would be, and I was in my old life as a agent and consultant, I was always urging developers I was working with that within their marketing brochure to have a page on sustainability, just to highlight, you know, what the building features are, what your approach is as a developer. And I that rarely happens. And I do think, I know that everyone has it probably on their website or embedded somewhere, but actually, you know, having it as part of the patter of when you're viewing a building, I think is a first stage, and actually breaking all of what this means down into consumer language. We've got a question from Paul Rankin. Firstly, one question, sorry to tick off, from an anonymous attendee. What is Utopia? I don't want to do a huge sales plug for Utopia. Richard, maybe you could just explain what Utopia does for you.
Sure, they're a tech provider. Basically, they provide a sensor that is installed into an apartment or a communal area that identifies certain metrics that then is data harvested, brought back into a report, and you can use that data to leverage performance of an individual apartment or individual area, an individual seat in a co-working area as well. Is that particular seat used more than any other seat, bizarrely? Or what's so unique about that? And it gives you the data to then impact a change if you want to. Or
right.
it's purely interesting information. And
also, I suppose, great for investor reporting. I should just say, for pure independence, there are other tech providers that provide that. Just wanting to get conscious of time and wanting to get through some of these other questions from Paul Rankin. Data capture can assist in optimizing building operational efficiency. How do build-to-rent residents feel about having their behavior monitored and measured, e.e. Fitbits and sensors, to provide this kind of data? Richard?
We've actually had no negative pushback. I think people understand that we're not doing this for any malicious reason. It's purely to understand the use of the building, the use of the apartment, and regards to Fitbit, that's a purely fun way of engaging with your team to make sure that their health and well-being is at their forefront of their minds as well. So it's all about making it fun, interesting, and no other alternative motive whatsoever.
I think you can deal with that in the narrative, can't you?
Yeah.
Like this shows, this is a physical representation of our investment into you know, improving your well-being, you know, gamifying, as you would say, or bringing this, changing this culture. And I think that is definitely, I mean, you know, some people, if they were cynical, could be like, well, I don't want this level of monitoring, and fine, it might not be for them.
Yeah.
But I definitely think it's an important narrative that you need to, and it needs to be part of a broader sustainability approach and ESG approach as a brand.
Yeah, health and well-being, absolutely. I think, you know, if you wanted to turn off your sensor in your apartment, of course we do that.
Yeah. Sorry, hi, Brendan.
I was just going to support that position. You know, I think what Moda do very well is they are fantastic translators. Translators of some sort of complex and quite boring technical stuff into something which is consumer friendly. And in the building of culture, you know, the role of ritual, of ceremony, I don't mean to be over elaborate here, but, you know, a regularized discussion point around something is how we build understanding and awareness. And that's why recycling is the most important, is because we have established rituals. And they can be they need to be benign, but they need to be benign, simple, and powerful.
Absolutely.
Can I use another example there? So we, under planning rules, we have to provide a bike parking space for every resident or every apartment. We know at the moment that they are rarely used. It's like a dozen bikes maybe, but there's like 200 spaces. So the next phase for us is, how do we get people to use some of the facilities that we've been bought, you know, purchased, the investors have put the money in, but we don't have enough engagement. So I think that, going back to that behavioral change, we have so many opportunities, so many facilities at our fingertips that we've already created, but we're not leveraging them enough at the moment, in my opinion, anyway, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So I still think we're on this, sounds a bit corny, on this journey, because we literally are. And
Yeah.
BTR has that benefit, providing bike spaces is amazing, but not enough people have bikes still.
I suppose that's a great example of, a lot of build to sell buildings would have that same planning provision.
Yeah.
But the ability for the management companies on an ongoing building in that respect to actually get the residents using it, that there isn't that level of input or impetus. Whereas for you guys, there is a huge opportunity there.
Yeah.
And maybe it shouldn't be walking to the moon. Maybe it should be cycling to the moon, Richard. And then you'll build that. Just a couple of other points I'd love to. Anonymous, how do you ensure that any changes you make are truly authentic and not just a case of greenwashing?
You've got to ask the people who you've asked to make a change, get their feedback. To me, it's all about that honest and appropriate feedback constantly being sought, whether that's through HomeViews or your own unique survey. We use HomeViews, obviously, as everyone else generally does. So we rely on that feedback. And I read every single review that comes through to Moda because it's so important. So I think that's truth and honesty really come into play.
Thank you very much. And lastly, I'm conscious we've got 4 minutes to the end of the webinar, and I want to let everyone, thank you so much, everyone, for these questions and comments. It's brilliant to see, how engaged people are in this subject. Just a last one, I think a really interesting one. From Jay, while build to rent will play a significant role in sustainable living, do you think there could be an opportunity to retrofit existing properties with these features? Brendan mentioned 40% impact by the built environment on carbon emissions, but obviously build-to-rent buildings versus existing buildings are a tiny proportion. I mean, that might not be answerable in the last 4 minutes, but Brendan, a quick take from you on that, the retrofit piece.
The short answer is absolutely yes, and I did mention retrofit earlier. So we're lucky that it's new buildings. Increasingly now we need to look at the existing stock and bring the same level of quality. I think the important thing about build to rent, yes, it's going to be a small sector. At the moment, we've got 250,000 homes either open or in construction, but the capacity is 2 million. That's the capacity of the housing association portfolios is 2.6 million. So we're going to be a big player in the marketplace, and it will be new and repurposed buildings. What we need to do is bring the same standards, the same quality, and the same approach and culture to whatever building we operate, and we will make a significant contribution. It's early days for us, but we've got a good future ahead of us.
Thank you, Brendan. Well, I think as we're a couple of minutes off, I'm going to draw this to a close. Brendan, Richard, thank you so much for your input today. I've really enjoyed this, and I hope that everyone on this panel can see that, sustainability and the strategy as a brand, as an investor, it's a complicated piece, but I think that the key to really change culture is to listen to what is important to your residents, listen to how they would like to live, and then give them pointers and give them the ability to live in that way. And I think the key point, particularly for build to rent, is if you can do that at a community level, not just at an individual level, that is what is going to have the biggest impact on the performance of these buildings, but also drive change. As we all know, build to rent is a small segment in the market at the moment, 90,000 plus completed units. However, we can show the way to the rest of the market, and I really believe that this case study of build to rent and how we're approaching this can have a positive impact for the rest of the residential sector, and we can take learnings from that. I would just say, from the first point, when it comes to engagement, getting resident feedback is a very obvious way of doing that, and more importantly, being able to benchmark that and understanding where that feedback sits in comparison to the wider market is key, and transparency and honesty drives that change. But thank you very much, Brendan and Richard, for joining me today. Everyone, you will receive a recording of this webinar, and you'll also now be able to download a copy of your sustainability report. If there are any questions that we didn't cover today, please get in touch. I'm sure Brendan and myself and Richard, we'd be delighted to answer anything offline. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.